Enatoth was small. It was a quiet village hidden among hills where time seemed to move slowly. There, among ancient olive trees and stone walls, a boy was born whom no one imagined would be a prophet. The son of Hilkiah, a respected priest, Jeremiah grew up listening to the songs of the temple, the rituals, and the stories of Moses and Elijah as if they were family tales. He was a quiet, attentive boy, one of those who observe more than they speak. But something about him always seemed different. He had eyes that saw beyond the present and a restlessness that even his father couldn't name. One night, alone in the fields, Jeremiah heard something. It wasn't the wind, nor the song of cicadas. It was a voice. It didn't shout, it didn't whisper, it just existed, steady as a muffled thunder inside his chest. And it said, "Before you were born, I already knew you." It was as if the world around him had stopped. His heart raced, his hands sweated. Who was he to speak for God? He tried to escape it. He claimed he was too young, awkward with words. But the voice would not negotiate. It mocked him. It touched his lips. It was like fire. From then on, Jeremiah was no longer just the son of a priest. He was someone who had been called, and not to a quiet life, not to fame or honor. His path would be one of confrontation, pain, and truth. He knew it. He felt it like someone who senses a storm before the clouds roll in. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. If this content touches your heart and you want to support us, feel free to click on the "Thanks a lot" button. All help is welcome and makes a big difference. Little by little, the peace of Anathoth became a distant memory. The world outside was falling apart. The kings of Judah were mired in political alliances, strange cults, and injustice everywhere. And God was tired. Jeremiah, still young, was thrust into the center of this hurricane. He needed to speak. He needed to warn them. But who would listen to a young man from the countryside shouting things no one wanted to hear? At first, Jeremiah still believed that someone would listen. He imagined that by warning the people, hearts would be broken, eyes would be opened, and Judah would return to the right path. But reality hit him like a rock in the face. No one wanted to listen. They laughed at him. They mocked him. They called him crazy, a prophet of chaos, a messenger of doom. And the more he spoke, the more isolated he became. His friends turned away. His family fell silent. Only he remained, and the mission. Even so, he couldn't stop. It was as if every word of God burned inside his chest, forcing its way out. He said, "There is fire in my bones." And it was true. Jeremiah carried this flame like a burden. It wasn't out of pride or glory. It was because he simply couldn't keep quiet. The city was sinking, and he shouted like someone trying to wake someone up during a fire. And he didn't speak carefully. His words cut like a razor. He called kings foolish, priests corrupt, and the people unfaithful. He said they were worshipping stone as if it were God, that they offered sacrifices in the name of vanity. He was harsh, direct, blunt, and that bothered people. It shook up the system. Jeremiah wasn't just another prophet in the crowd. He was a thorn in the nation's side. One day, he stopped at the temple gate, in the middle of the crowd going to pray, and spoke out, "Do not trust this temple. Do you think you can live in wickedness and then hide behind the walls of the sanctuary?" The crowd froze. It was like spitting fire on dry straw. But the strangest thing was that even though he was hated, Jeremiah was also listened to. There was something in those words, a weight, a raw truth, and that was scary, because no one likes to hear that the end is coming, especially when everything on the outside seems normal. There were days when Jeremiah walked through the city like a man who had already seen the future, and that was exactly what he had. He saw what no one else wanted to see: the crowded streets, the bustling markets, the priests smiling at the temple gates. But behind it all, he saw cracks. Small at first, like cracks in a beautiful vase, but growing day by day. And he warned them. He warned them like someone trying to stop someone from crossing a bridge about to collapse. "Sword! Famine! Destruction!" he shouted, and the people laughed. "Here comes the prophet of chaos again." But Jeremiah wasn't joking. He felt the pain before the wound. He cried before the loss. And it was a heavy, painful cry that came from within, as if he carried the pain of an entire people on his shoulders. Sometimes he cried alone in the fields, talking to God, asking why him, why this impossible mission. But the answer never changed. He was the messenger, even if no one wanted to receive the message. One day, God told him to buy a new linen belt, wear it for a while, then hide it in a crevice in the rock near the river. Sometime later, he told him to fetch it again. The belt was rotten, useless. "So shall this people be," said God. That was the kind of message Jeremiah had to deliver. Everything was symbolic. Everything was loaded with meaning, but no one cared. Or worse, they were annoyed. They wanted to silence that uncomfortable voice. But he continued, his eyes red from crying and his voice hoarse from warning people. Each word was an arrow shot into the void, hoping to hit a heart still willing to listen. Jeremiah began to become a serious problem. He wasn't just a madman shouting in the middle of the square. He was someone who challenged the king, the religious leaders, the army, the people, and not with a sword, but with words as sharp as a blade. King Jehoiakim, for example, couldn't even bear to hear his name. One day, when he received a scroll with Jeremiah's prophecies written by Baruch, the prophet's faithful scribe, he made sure to burn the scroll piece by piece, throwing each part into the fire as if he were getting rid of poison. But Jeremiah was not shaken. He sat down with Baruch, took a deep breath, and had everything written again. Every word, every judgment, every tear turned into a sentence. But now, even heavier, harder, because the people continued to go into the abyss smiling. There was a time when they tried to silence him for good. They locked Jeremiah in a dark cell, then threw him into a dry well. There was no water, only mud, lots of mud. He sank knee-deep into that cold, damp mud, dark, alone, forgotten. It was as if the whole world wanted to bury him before his time. But even there, at the bottom of that hole, he did not break. His voice still echoed, low but alive. He was saved by a foreigner, an Ethiopian named Ebed-Melech, who had the courage to confront the palace officials to get the prophet out of there. They pulled Jeremiah out with ropes, using old rags so as not to hurt his arms even more. The scene was almost symbolic, the man who carried the weight of words being lifted by someone who was neither part of the religious elite nor the nobility. And even after all that, Jeremiah spoke again. He faced them again. The king could command everything except the truth that burned in the prophet's heart. Meanwhile, in the north, the Babylonian troops sharpened their swords. The sound of horses' hooves could already be heard in the dust carried by the wind. Babylon was no longer just a distant threat. It was real, tangible. Nebuchadnezzar's army was coming like an iron storm, crushing everything in its path. Neighboring cities fell one by one, and Judah began to understand that the siege was closing in. But even in the face of this, the leaders still insisted on trusting alliances, strategies, and promises of peace that were nothing but smoke. Jeremiah, steadfast as ever, said what no one wanted to hear. Surrender. Don't fight. This battle is already lost. It was God who sent it. The entire city turned against him. They called him a traitor, an enemy of the people, a prophet saying it was better to surrender. It seemed crazy, but Jeremiah was not talking about cowardice. He was talking about obedience. He knew that resistance was not courage, it was stubbornness, and that stubbornness would cost them dearly, very dearly. When the siege began in earnest, it was just as Jeremiah had predicted. Fear crept in through the windows, hunger through the alleys, and despair took hold of the people. Mothers shared crumbs, soldiers fled, priests fell silent. The high walls of Jerusalem, which had once seemed so secure, now trembled with every impact of the Babylonian battering rams. And Jeremiah watched it all from close by. He saw the walls fall. He saw the temple being looted. He saw the fire rise high, engulfing wood, gold, history, faith. He heard the screams. He smelled the destruction. It was the end of an era. The city of David was on its knees. But strange as it may seem, Jeremiah did not say, "I told you so." He wept. He wept for a people he had tried to save. He wept for a temple that was once holy, now in ashes. He wept like a father watching his son go astray. And yet, even with everything destroyed, he still had words to deliver. Words that spoke not only of judgment, but also of the future. Words written in letters that would travel to where the people were now being dragged. The exile had begun, but Jeremiah's voice was not yet finished. Those who survived the fall of Jerusalem were taken away in chains. Men, women, children, all dragged like cattle to a strange land, where the language was different, the gods were different, and the sky seemed more distant. It was exile. The wound was still open. The longing for home burned in their hearts. There in Babylon, the people wept. Some tried to understand, others just wanted to forget. But it was at that moment, in the midst of pain and foreign land, that a letter arrived. It came from Jerusalem, written by the same hand that for years had tried to warn of the disaster. Jeremiah, the prophet, was still alive, and now he wrote not to warn, but to encourage. "Build houses," he said, "plant gardens, marry your children, live." The letter was simple, but it cut deep. How could they live? They had lost everything, the temple, the city, their freedom. But Jeremiah insisted it was time to put down roots, even in the middle of the desert, because this was not the end. It was a process, and God was still there. "I know the plans I have for you," said the prophet, "plans for peace, not destruction." Jeremiah, even from afar, taught the people to take a deep breath, open their eyes, and see beyond the sadness. They would not return soon. It would be 70 years, an entire generation growing up far from home, but it was still a promise. It was still hope. While some prophets said that everything would return to normal in a few days, Jeremiah did the opposite. He said, "Do not believe those sweet voices. The reality is bitter, but it is true. And it is from truth that reconstruction is born." His words crossed the desert, the walls, the tears. They fell like seeds on the hard ground of captivity. And even there, even far away, they began to sprout. But Jeremiah did not speak only of the present. Amidst the pain and dust, he began to announce something even stranger, a new kind of covenant, something that would not be written in stone. Jeremiah walked through the streets of destroyed Jerusalem as if treading on the ruins of a dream. Everything that was once sacred was now rubble. And yet, amid the dust and silence, he continued to prophesy. One day, God told him to buy a clay pot, simple, ordinary. He took it to a public place, full of people. He raised the pot high, and without saying another word, threw it hard against the ground. The sound was sharp, direct, cutting. The pot broke into dozens of pieces. Everyone looked. Jeremiah simply said, "So shall this people be." It was powerful. It was visual, and no one could say they didn't understand. Like the pot, Judah had been broken, and there was no way to put it back together again. But then came what no one expected. Even with everything broken, God still spoke of a new beginning. Jeremiah began to speak of a new covenant, a different alliance, something that would not be written on stone tablets or kept inside a temple. "This time," he said, "God will write the law on the heart of each person." And that sounded strange. What do you mean, no temple, no sacrifice, no altar? But Jeremiah saw beyond that. He spoke of a time when the relationship with God would be direct, intimate, internal, where there would be no need for an intermediary because God would be there, present within. as if the Spirit breathed life into the chest of each person, and it wasn't just a distant promise. He said that a descendant of David would come, someone righteous who would rule with wisdom, a different king, a new time. It was a hope planted amid the rubble. Meanwhile, the prophet did not walk alone. He had someone by his side who took care of his words with the same care one would take to guard a flame on a windy night. Baruch was the kind of man few people noticed in a crowd. Quiet, observant, always with ink on his fingers and rolls of papyrus under his arm. But he was the one who transformed Jeremiah's voice into permanent words. While the prophet spoke with fire in his eyes, Baruch listened, took notes, and organized. One wrote with his soul, the other with his hand, and together they kept alive the message that no one wanted to hear. When Jeremiah could not go to the temple, it was Baruch who read God's warnings aloud. He stood firm in the middle of the crowd, reading every sentence, every promise, every accusation. And he did so, even though he knew the risk, because at that time, carrying the truth could cost you your life. There were people who tried to kill them. The king ordered that they both be arrested, but none of that stopped the pair. On one of the most memorable occasions, Jeremiah was forbidden from entering the temple, so he dictated everything to Baruch, word for word, and told him to go in his place. Baruch went up to the house of the scribe Gemariah, facing the temple courtyard, and read in a firm voice, even though his heart was racing. The words fell like a hammer on stone. Some remained silent. Others ran to King Jehoiakim. When the king heard the reading, he took the scroll, cut it with a knife, and threw it into the fire, piece by piece. He thought that this would silence the message. But Jeremiah simply ordered everything to be written again, and Baruch, without complaint, began again. It wasn't just paper. It was memory. It was resistance. Because while everything was falling apart, the palace, the temple, the walls, those words remained alive, and even in fear, even under threat, they wrote, because they knew that one day someone would still need to read them. Jerusalem was in ruins, but some had stayed. The poorest, those who were of no interest to the empire, those who had not been taken into captivity. Among them was Jeremiah. He remained there amid the rubble, trying to help those who were left find some direction. The governor appointed by the Babylonians, Gedaliah, seemed to be a chance for a new beginning. He was a peaceful man, willing to rebuild with what little remained. But the peace was short-lived. A conspiracy arose. A group led by Ishmael, an ambitious man, assassinated Gedaliah in an ambush. New blood on ancient soil. Fear once again took hold of those who remained. Many believed that after that the Babylonians would come to finish what was left, and they saw only one way out: flee to Egypt. Jeremiah was called. They wanted to know if they should go. "Speak to God for us," they asked. The prophet prayed, waited, and then returned with the answer: "Stay, do not flee. God will take care of you here." The answer was clear. But they had already decided before they asked. They did the opposite, and they even accused Jeremiah of lying, saying that he had been manipulated by the Babylonians. They left, and they took Jeremiah with them, by force. Dragged away like someone troublesome they couldn't leave behind, the prophet was pushed once again away from his land, not by an empire, but by his own people. They arrived in Egypt hoping for safety, but Jeremiah soon warned them, "This is no refuge either. The sword will reach you here." Even in Egypt, he did not remain silent. He continued to prophesy, even in the face of indifference. His eyes were tired, his beard gray, his body slower, but his mouth still spoke the truth. And it was there, in the heavy silence of a foreign land, that his story began to disappear from the records. No one knows for sure how Jeremiah's life ended. He disappeared like a candle that goes out when the wind blows hard. Some say he died in Egypt, stoned by his own people. Others believe he lived his last days in silence, watching from afar what was left of the nation. There is no marked grave, no date. only words, and they have stood the test of time. Years later, when Jesus walked the roads of Galilee, many believed he was Jeremiah reincarnated, not by chance. The tone of his messages was similar. He confronted leaders, wept for the city, spoke of a new covenant, the same fire in his eyes, the same loneliness that accompanies those who carry a mission too heavy for human shoulders. And when Jesus announced that the temple would fall, as Jeremiah had done before, few understood. It was the same ancient echo blowing again through the alleys of faith. The letters, lamentations, and visions of the prophet were read by exiles, scholars, and preachers. His words became comfort and warning, wall and mirror. Each generation found a piece of itself in what he said, in the fear of losing everything, in the courage to keep speaking, in the hope that persists even in dry land. Jeremiah was not a hero in the usual sense. He did not win battles. He did not ascend to the throne. He did not have faithful followers clapping for him. He lived rejected, imprisoned, pushed around, humiliated. But he left something that time could not erase, an unyielding truth, a faith that does not depend on the setting, and a voice that, even forgotten by many, still disturbs, still comforts, still calls. And perhaps, in the end, that is precisely where Jeremiah's greatness lies, not in how he ended, but in everything he stood for. Because if we stop to really listen, there is a lot that his story still has to teach us. What Jeremiah left behind was not a legacy of visible achievements or victories. It was something rarer, a testimony of faithfulness at a time when everything around him was falling apart. He was the steady voice in the midst of confusion, the last light before the blackout. He spoke what no one wanted to hear, carried the weight of words that burned inside him, and yet he did not stop, even alone, even afraid. We live in a time that values applause, numbers, fame. Jeremiah lived the opposite. The more he spoke, the more doors closed. The more he obeyed, the more he suffered. But he did not seek success. He sought to be faithful, and that is perhaps one of the greatest lessons he left us. The truth is not always pleasant, but it always sets us free. Jeremiah teaches us that there are times when God calls someone not to shine, but to resist, to be a pillar when everything around them is falling, to hold the torch in the dark, even knowing that no one will thank them for it. He didn't see the restoration with his own eyes, but he planted the seeds of it in every word, in every tear, in every painful silence. And there's something else. Jeremiah showed that you can have faith even when you're at rock bottom, even when everything seems to have gone wrong, even when the world says it's over. Yes, he cried. Yes, he had doubts, but he never let go of what God had placed in his hands. That's courage. That's true faith. Deep down, Jeremiah wasn't just talking to Judah. He was talking to me. He was talking to you, because all of us at some point feel like we're in the middle of ruins, of dreams, plans, paths. And when that happens, maybe it's time to remember him. The man who was called when he was still a boy, who wasn't heard, but never stopped talking. Because even if everything falls, the voice of truth remains standing. If you liked Jeremiah's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we will explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.